Everyone was super hyped when the very first RGB COB lights were announced, but those have nothing on the new generation of lights like the Amaran 150c and 300c. I have the 300c, so that's what you'll be seeing in this video, but the 150c is identical, just less powerful. Like other Amaran lights, these come in a lockable, rigid, expanded foam carrying case that does an exceptional job at protecting its contents. Inside is the light, the hyperreflector, and the AC adapter, and there's two small details that I love about this case. One is simply the inclusion of a name badge on the front. Plenty of other brands use the same carrying cases for multiple products, and it gets really annoying having to open the case just to see what's inside. The second thing is just the positioning of the light inside the case in relation to the handle. It's really well balanced and makes it more efficient for carrying, just so it's easier to bring with you and less tiring if you have to carry it a long distance. The main body of these lights is plastic, but I think it's a step up over the original Amaran 100 and 200 lights. Everything just feels tighter and more solid, and both the mounting yoke and receiver are beefed up metal. The tightening handle is plenty big, so you'll have no issues with sagging using large modifiers, and it also has an integrated umbrella mount as well. I also think the dual handle design adds to the rigidity of this light, and the knobs turn both smoothly and click satisfyingly. At this point, it almost seems unnecessary to explain the basic functionality of this light, but you can adjust both the brightness and color temperature in CCT mode, as well as the hue and saturation in HSI mode. You can also access additional modes, including special effects, using the Sidus Link mobile app, which lets you control individual or groups of lights. The more advanced stuff is not immediately accessible on the back of the light itself, so just keep that in mind. Since these lights have full RGB capabilities, that means they also have green magenta tint control. Color temperature is only half of the equation, and along with having a CCT measured in Kelvin, every light has a tint measurement in either green or magenta. The tint can vary wildly between different lights, especially across different brands, so being able to adjust that on your light is one of the most overlooked features that I see. Eventually, I think even bicolor lights without RGB capabilities will include tint control, but for now, both the 150 and 300c give you that functionality. You might notice that the cover on the LED itself is a little hazy looking, but that's by design. Aputure engineered an Optic to go in front of the LED on these lights for the smoothest output possible. Some bicolor lights can create visible patterns because they output light from multiple LEDs at the same time. It's especially visible when using certain modifiers like Fresnel lenses, but the blending optic on these lights helps eliminate that. The cable going from the wall into the AC brick, as well as the cable from the brick into the light, are both locking types. And the only thing I don't really like is how short the cable from the wall into the AC brick is. If anything, it makes sense for that cable to be longer, that way you can hang the brick on a light stand and still have plenty of cable to reach an outlet that might be far away. Both cables include Velcro straps, and the AC adapter has a little metal hanger so you can hang it on a light stand to keep everything nice and neat. The input voltage on these lights is 48 volts, so you'll need to pick up something like the optional Aputure 2-bay battery station if you want to run these on batteries. You can't just use a single V-mount battery with the proper cable because the voltage won't match. The fan noise on these lights is pretty much identical to the average fan in all the lights that I test, and in my opinion, it's not going to be loud enough to affect your audio in any way. All of that sounds great, but doesn't really matter unless the color accuracy of these lights is good enough to be usable. I tested the 300C with my Sekonic C800 from 1 meter with a bare bulb and got the following results. With the 300C set to 3200 Kelvin, I measured an actual CCT of 3154 Kelvin and a brightness of 8140 lux. So this light is very accurate when it comes to the actual light output versus the CCT that's shown on the screen, which is definitely not always the case. You'll notice the color correction number of 0, and that's due to the fact that I'm able to adjust the green magenta tint and make it perfectly neutral, or like I said earlier, to match other lights if necessary. I got a CRI of 97.4, TLCI of 98, and SSI versus the tungsten standard of 84. The individual R values are also all excellent, so on the tungsten end at least, everything is looking good. With the 300C set to 5500 Kelvin, I measured an actual CCT of 5645 Kelvin and a brightness of 10,200 lux. So it's not quite as accurate on the daylight end as to what is shown on the screen, but still, Within 150 Kelvin is above average, so I have no complaints. A brightness of 10,200 lux is enough to give you proper exposure at f/18 at 1/50th of a second shutter speed and ISO 400. Obviously, adding a softbox and diffusion will bring that down a few stops, but even then, it can produce plenty of light. Again, I was able to adjust the tint to achieve a nearly perfectly neutral color correction number of just 0.1 magenta. I got a CRI of 96.8, a TLCI of 98, and an SSI versus the daylight standard of 73. The only thing I noticed is that the R12 value is 74.4, which is a little lower than I typically like to see. I'm always much more worried about the R9 value because that's what's important for accurately rendering skin tones, and that's at 93.3. So the lower R12 value doesn't really bother me, especially since the SSI and everything else is just fine. With the hyperreflector attached at 5500 Kelvin, I got a brightness of 26,900 lux. That's 1 1/3 stops brighter and nearly identical to what Aputure lists in their specs. One nice thing about this reflector is that it doesn't really change the CCT or the tint measurements, and some modifiers can change that drastically, so it's just nice to know that this one doesn't do that. The Amaran 150c retails for $359 and the 300c for $569. Not cheap by any means, but considering that similarly powered bicolor only lights are only $50 or $100 cheaper, I think it's worth the cost for the added flexibility that these lights give you. I think the tint control alone is worth the extra cost, especially if you're using multiple lights or need to match other lights or ambient light sources in your scene. But what do you think? Leave a comment and let me know if you plan to pick up these lights or if you think there's something better out there. Links are in the description if you want to check these lights out further. That's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.